Well, I think our problems run pretty deep right now in the state of California. And my belief is that the leadership would definitely address environmental issues, but I think there are some problems that may even be bigger than that, that encompass the environmental concerns. I think we're having a problem of confidence in government itself. Right now, people don't want to pay taxes. People don't trust elected officials. Their ratings are very, very low. And I think a governor has to, in a way, be a booster of government itself. They have to convince people that it's worth pooling our resources in this state to affect some very important changes. Some of those changes is nothing short of saving life on Earth through affecting really strong and enacting really strong legislation to combat climate change. And so I believe a future governor has to be a leader, to get people excited about government again, to get people to kind of release some of that cynicism that's been building for decades and decades, ever since Watergate, and to see government as a way of solving problems and to get people wanting to participate. Because right now, if we're going to lick, global warming, we have to get everyone to participate. We have to get people excited and trusting of the leaders to get us on these solutions. I think it's going to take somebody with charisma and really strong opinions, someone who is going to challenge the public, not just coddle them, but lead them in a new direction. I think it's too much to hope for, but that's what I think needs to happen. I think any of the candidates could actually rise to the occasion. You have to kind of catch fire to be a leader. Sometimes leadership is thrust on a person by circumstance, and they rise to the occasion. And I think that could happen with the individuals who are running for governor. I think they would have to grow in the job. We do need to see some very profound reforms in the government structures. We do need to get away from the 2/3 on a budget. We need to get away from a 2/3 requirement on passing taxes or other financial measures. So I think that we need a governor who convinces people that the right thing to do is to trust government with your money. The right thing to do is for the people of California to pool their resources to affect change. And on the question of water, there's a stunning statistic that not many people know about, and this is from the state of California itself. By the year 2100, our snowpack will be diminished by 90%. 90%. Now, we may get the same amount of precipitation, but it will not be held in the beautiful Sierra Nevada mountains any longer. It's going to not come down as snow, it'll come down as rain. And so we need to find a way to build an infrastructure that can actually adapt to the new circumstances. So I believe that we will have to deal with storage. My preference is to store the water in aquifers and not to build above ground storage. But I can see the argument where people would say that you would need to resort to that. It's not my choice, but I can see where that argument comes from. But absolutely, we need to start thinking strategically about adaptation while we're doing everything in our power to try to combat global warming. My concern is that we haven't really assessed the full implications of what climate change will bring to California. And I think that a future governor absolutely has to be the messenger of bad news, of what we're anticipating. And without that information, the public looks at funding for renewables as something that's nice, but an option. And we look at water conservation as a nice idea, but it's an option. But in the context of climate change, the equation changes significantly. we have to then start looking at what's the cost of not making those investments in water conservation, in energy efficiency, in paying for renewables. And the cost of not doing those changes is so high that I think Californians would do the math themselves. They would see that we have to engage in environmental changes, environmental activism, in the purchasing of renewables, in energy efficiency and water conservation, because they know the consequences of not doing those things. It then becomes a smart investment that's a necessity rather than today. It looks just like a warm, fuzzy choice, and it really isn't. It's a matter of human survival.
You said the governor is going to have to be sort of the bearer of bad news, but it seems to me there's a lot of good news that the future governor could tell the voters about, you know, with regard to solving our energy security and environmental crisis all in one, with green jobs, you know, that provide a fair wage. There seems to be a lot of sort of good news in all of this too. Do you think that that's a message that might resonate maybe a little bit better than the bad news?
Of course, the positive messages resonate better. It encourages people to engage in, you know, problem solving, and it's much more hopeful. But I think the pendulum has shifted too far. Candidly, I think we have to deliver a very strong, sober message. You know, tethered to that message is that there are concrete things that we can do here in California to combat global warming, but we do need to convey the specter of what awaits us if we do nothing. Because right now, in Los Angeles, we have a great effort underway to try to put solar panels out on as many rooftops as possible, to have large solar developments. And the problem right now is that we're running into political opposition saying it's too expensive. Well, it is too expensive if the consequences of not doing it are nothing. But the consequences right now is that the city of Los Angeles is burning coal at a tremendous rate. 44% of our energy comes from burning coal in Utah and Arizona. And we want to get off of coal. But we're not going to get off of coal if people think that maybe global warming isn't so bad after all. Or if it's a, you know, if it's not a terrible consequence. It is a terrible consequence. And we have to try to do everything in our power to stop that. You're going to interview people that are going to say that how important it is to implement AB 32, how important it is to implement SB 375. Those are some of our key legislative tools to really make a difference here in California. But there's some other subtle things. For example, you know, there's educational curricula that simply isn't being implemented that would provide an environmental education for kids K through 12. This, in my view, is one of the most important things that we need a governor to do, is to make sure that we are helping California's youth understand environmental concerns. Another thing that we really should do with a governor is the balance of prisons on the one hand and prevention programs on the other. And it almost becomes an analog to the situation that we're facing regarding climate change. You know, are we only going to do adaptation, which is sort of prisons, you know, we're preparing for the worst, we're dealing with the worst, or do we get into preventive strategies? What is more hopeful? To help the youth of California to deal with their broken families, to deal with drug problems, to deal with a bad economy, to deal with gangs and peer pressure. Do we deal with those things in a preventive approach, or are we only going to deal with it at the end result? I think, you know, just penciling it out, it's far cheaper to engage in preventing the problem than dealing with the problem itself. You know, in the medical community, they have a saying, you know, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, and I think that's exactly right. We need to be into preventive strategies, and we need to get a governor who's willing to stand up for those.